Bad Boys, Bad Boys 2, and Bad Boys for Life. Outside of Lethal Weapon, it has proven itself to be one of the main quintessential franchises of the buddy cop genre and was the spark for a lot of careers. Some we're thankful for, others we tolerate. So with Bad Boys 2 following 8 years later, and the latest installment of the franchise, Bad Boys for Life, 17 years after that, it has now established itself as a movie trilogy. But is it a proper movie trilogy? And if it's not, how can we make it one? Let's find out. Bad Boys was released in 1995 by Sony Pictures' flagship studio, Columbia Pictures, kicking off one of the most popular film franchises to be produced by household name Jerry Bruckheimer. With a story by George Gallo and written for the screen by screenwriters Doug Richardson, Jim Mulholland, and Michael Berry, this movie paved the way to making Will Smith the movie theater powerhouse we know him as today, with Roland Emmerich's Independence Day solidifying his acting credit in the business 1 year later.
Welcome to Earth.
It was also Michael Bay's theatrical directorial debut, and helped establish him as one of Hollywood's most sought-after action film directors at the time. You know, until he only became known as the Explosion Man. Nevertheless, Will Smith and Martin Lawrence's take on Mike Lowrey and Marcus Burnett, respectively, helped bring a very 90s blend of action and comedy, and a refreshing splash of color to buddy cop films, a genre previously adorned by white and white-passing actors before Richard Donner's 1987 classic Lethal Weapon laid the groundwork.
Don't be alarmed, we're Negroes.
The script, the chemistry, and Bay's direction generated over $120 million in profit at the box office. And while it took them years to do it, the decision to make a sequel was pretty much a no-brainer. Bad Boys 2 was released in 2003 and was a huge financial success for the studio, making over $140 million during its time in theaters. Yet, while it's definitely the most action-packed installment of Bad Boys, it's also one of the most problematic one when it comes to things presented in the story that clearly did not age well. It was also the film that established a type of humor that Michael Bay would start to be known for in his later projects.
Bumblebee, stop lubricating the man.
Get that thing to stop, huh?
Yet, despite this, Sony still wanted another Bad Boys sequel after seeing Bad Boys 2 make over $20 million more than the first one. But by the time they demanded it, both Michael Bay and Will Smith required top-notch pay due to them both becoming hot commodities after the first film, and there was a concern that Sony wouldn't be willing to pay either of them what they were actually worth. Because of that, it took the studio 6 years to start work on a script for the third installment of Bad Boys, and another 9 to get the film into development. And what we got as a result was a third installment that takes place 17 years after the events of Bad Boys 2, called Bad Boys for Life, which, in my opinion, resulted in one of the best things that could have ever happened to the franchise. Bad Boys for Life came out January 2020 and did ridiculously well at the box office. It broke the record for the highest domestic box office debut for the month, raking in over $59 million and over $420 million worldwide during its theatrical run. Despite it being the franchise that started his career, it was the first installment that was not directed by Michael Bay, and instead directed by the Belgian duo Adil and Bilal, who will be also directing at least one episode of Marvel Studios' upcoming Ms. Marvel series for Disney+. And they did such a bang-up job with this movie that they are now set to direct Eddie Murphy's theatrical return to the role of Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop 4, which is a franchise that I also have plans on visiting soon in this segment. I say that because, in my opinion, Bad Boys for Life fixed a lot of the things that I personally had problems with in Bad Boys 1 and Bad Boys 2. The action was evenly distributed throughout the movie, Mike and Marcus's friendship and camaraderie matured with their age without taking away from their personalities, and, you know, no shock values at the expense of the LGBT community.
He's a mean fuck.
Look here.
I also thought that having Mike be the focus for the plot was actually pretty smart considering the themes the movie was trying to convey. Bad Boys for Life couldn't really do that with Marcus's character because he already came to those conclusions in Bad Boys 2 in regards to his family and making sure he reveled in the life he had with his wife and kids to the point of making sure he would always be there for them by any means necessary. Because of how much of a wild card and a playboy Mike is, he was the optimal choice for writers Peter Craig and Joe Carnahan to explore this level of development. After avoiding it for such a long time, how do you have a character like Mike Lowry explore the themes of true love and lineage in a way that not only makes sense to him considering the actions of the two previous films, but that he also walks away from becoming a better person because of the scenario? Enter the film's villain and Mike's vindictive ex-lover, Isabel Lebluja Aletas, and their bastard son Armando, played by Kate Del Castillo and Jacob Scipio respectively. She's on a mission to take down every major cop and official who had a hand in taking down and arresting her and her husband Benito Aletas, a major cartel kingpin, including Mike, who was deep undercover in the cartel as her husband's driver in order to get the info necessary to put them down. But he and Isabel fell in love and planned on running away together. He realized how dangerous she was and turned her in when he turned in Benito, who was killed in prison afterwards, but not before Isabel and Mike conceived a child, Armando, who she gave birth to during the beginning of her stint in prison. When he came of age, he broke her out and began to enact their revenge, all while Armando was ignorant to the fact that one of the people on Isabel's hit list is actually his father. Honestly, this is a pretty dope plot. It explores the themes of love and lineage in a way that makes sense to a character like Mike, and the execution brought some of the best dramatic moments the franchise has had in a very long time. But with the way that it currently is, does it make the three films work as a proper trilogy? Unfortunately, no. The first rule in a proper trilogy is that there has to be an element of the first film's plot that plays a significant role in the third in a way that makes all three of the films work together as one cohesive story. From there, you can use the third film to reveal new information about what's being carried over from the first and expand upon it in various ways, the most common form being in a plot twist. Bad Boys for Life, as good as it is, doesn't check those boxes. The only two elements that make it over from the past two films are two specifically made in Bad Boys 2. One in the form of Reggie, the boyfriend turned husband of Marcus's daughter that he and Mike intimidated 17 years ago.
You ever made love to a man?
No.
You want to?
No, sir.
And the other in a blink and you'll miss it reference to Gabrielle Union's character Sid, aka Marcus's sister, when Mike nonchalantly mentions their breakup.
What you mean, like 1 to 10?
Yeah, 10 being...
Like when I broke up with your sister?
No, that was me out of 10.
I still feel a certain type of way about that, but at least she has her own spin-off show called LA's Finest over on Fox, so we're just going to move on. So yes, while we have those references and callbacks to Bad Boys 2, none exist for Bad Boys, especially any plot elements from Bad Boys that Bad Boys for Life can expand on. In a way, you could say that Bad Boys for Life doesn't even try, because when Mike breaks down the situation to Marcus after realizing that Isabel's behind everything, he mentions that the entire breakdown of the Aletas cartel happened before Marcus and he partnered up, predating the events of the first movie. So as it currently stands, the Bad Boys Trilogy is not a proper trilogy. It teased the idea of it being one with the way they marketed Bad Boys for Life, but ended it in a way that made For Life just a third installment of a film franchise that hinted at more installments to come. And that's not to say that you can't continue a franchise after establishing the first 3 films in it as a proper trilogy. All it means is that the arc that encompasses the first 3 installments is as complete as it can be in what you can do with it and bring it full circle by connecting it to the first. But there is a reason why this isn't the end of the video, readers. Because while it may not be one, we can for sure do some tweaking to the Bad Boys for Life that can make these 3 movies fall under the Proper Movie Trilogy category. All we have to do is find a thread in the 1995 movie that's strong enough, carry it over to the 2020 movie, and adjust some of the key points in For Life in order to accomplish it. So let's revisit the first movie and see what we can work with. So, if you go back to watch the 1995 Bad Boys today, you can clearly tell that this was Michael Bay's first full-length feature film that he directed. You can also tell that Will and Martin didn't really have their chemistry set yet with how awkward their dialogue and improv moments were. I mean, they definitely got it ironed out and proved to gel well together in 2 and For Life, but the 1995 Bad Boys felt more like a trial period that had more good results than bad ones when we open out and pour out all the contents of the mixed bag. Am I saying that the 1995 movie is unwatchable? No, not at all. But if you've never seen it before or just saw the sequels, you just need to be prepared for its huge product of its time energy irradiates. With that being said, we don't have to watch the entire movie in order to find the thread that we're looking for. It actually happens within the first 30 minutes, in the form of the movie's MacGuffin. The main villain of the movie, Fauché, with the help of an ex-cop, breaks into internal affairs and is able to steal a tremendous amount of drugs from evidence. Said ex-cop hires some late-night entertainment in the form of Max Logan, who brings her roommate and best friend Julie Mott. But while Julie is away in the bathroom, Fauché kills the ex-cop for bringing and showing Max a portion of the stolen drugs in an attempt to have some fun, and kills Max thinking she's the only witness. Turns out Julie saw the whole thing and is able to escape. So now Mike and Marcus have to protect her from Fauché, and there we have our movie. However, there are a few details within the plot of the first Bad Boys that are integral, yet are left open-ended enough to where they can be used to establish a connection to Bad Boys for Life. For example, when Julie calls internal affairs after escaping the Al Capone suite, she requests Mike Laurie specifically. She does that because Max lets her know that they're only there because she's doing Mike a favor and that he can be trusted in case shit went sour. Which it did. And while it's implied that Max not only did this favor for Mike because she has feelings for him, Mike asked this favor of her in the first place because Marcus and he were assigned to finding the drugs due to the previous history with them. And the previous history is very important to their significance as the main characters.
All that heroin,
This
gone.
was our career bust, which is what, $100 million?
Gone.
That's right, readers. The drugs that were stolen were the result of the case that made them the famous dynamic duo that the movie tells us that they are when we're introduced to them. It put them on the map in Miami and brought more attention to Mike Laurie's state of mind when it came to how seriously he takes police work due to his inheritance. Because they were the ones who acquired the drugs in this famous bust of theirs, they were put on the case to find Fauché, the one who stole them. And it's through the two having to work with 2 other officers that we get the name and the status of the man they got the drugs from to begin with.
All right, but now wait a second. It was Carrera's drugs in the first place, right? But it couldn't have been him because he was killed in prison.
Killed in prison, you say? So, let's review everything right quick. We now have two very important strings that we can weave together into a proper piece of thread. The 100 grand worth of drugs from Mike and Marcus's first big bust that made them famous, and Guerrera, the name of the cartel leader that they acquired it from. However, because the film stated that he died in prison just as quick as they dropped his name, that's the only bit of information we get from him throughout the remainder of the movie. Now remember, when it comes to proper movie trilogies, it's not the job of the first to expand on the lore and exposition that it gives. It's the third, because it's supposed to either reveal something new about it, make it play a role in the plot of said installment, or sometimes both at the same time. And by making a few adjustments with the way that the plot for Bad Boys for Life is set up, we now have a way of restructuring it so that it still keeps its essence, but that it does it with the thread from the first movie. Let me break it down for you. In Bad Boys for Life, there is a drug kingpin named Benito Eletas, who, along with his wife Isabel, was taken down by a pre-established Mike Laurie and a group of other officers and officials. He died in prison. In Bad Boys 1, there is a drug kingpin with the surname of Guerrera that Mike and Marcus took down that put them on the map as two of the best cops in Miami. He also died in prison. So let's turn Benito Eletas into Benito Guerrera and have the case Mike was deep undercover to be the one that put him and Marcus on the map. Doing that off the bat simplifies a lot of things. Instead of two separate cases, there's now one, and there's now a proper plot point in Bad Boys for Life carried over from the first movie that can be expanded upon over the course of the movie that already snugly fits in the plot of Bad Boys for Life presented to us. We just need to address a few points that may or may not affect the movie and do a proper breakdown of how everything would wrap up because of it. With that being said, let me rip off this band-aid right quick. Making this change would not affect the logistics or involvement of Armando at all. There is a 25-year gap between the events of Bad Boys 1 and Bad Boys for Life, which puts Armando at the proper age to have been born either during or before the events of the first movie. Especially since Jacob Scipio, the actor who portrays Armando in Bad Boys for Life, was born January 10th, 1993, 2 years before the first movie was released. And considering how young Marcus's children were in 1995 according to said movie, a 1.5 to 2 year old Armando existing during the events of said movie wouldn't be a stretch at all. Speaking of Marcus, the only thing that we would have to change about his role in all this was that he knew Mike was undercover when they took down Guerrera. Because of protocol, along with a combination of Mike's personal discretion and levels of openness at the time, he would still be ignorant to the fact that Mike and Isabel were an item, along with his inner game of tug of war when choosing the Force over her. Any knowledge he would have on Isabel would be limited to what was necessary to bring Benito Guerrera down, thus allowing his reaction when Mike explains everything to remain unchanged.
Mike, you fucked a married witch?
So all the shit I just said, and that was your takeaway?
Because the 1995 Bad Boys movie gives us such a limited amount of information regarding their first bust and how they took down Guerrera and his crew, Bad Boys for Life, if it were outfitted to follow the protocols of a proper movie trilogy, would provide so much context regarding what actually went down. So let's go on and establish some of that context. First off, let's solidify that we're having the Guerrera case be Mike and Marcus's first. That way it holds more significance to it being the one that made the two famous with Miami PD. Also, for reasons I'll explain later on, let's have Captain Howard be the one that was running the show. The individuals on the case are Mike, who was assigned to go deep undercover as Guerrera's driver to keep tabs on him after asking for the job to prove that he isn't just a trust fund baby playing cop. and his best friend and newly appointed partner, Marcus, who leads the team responsible for capturing and arresting Guerrera's men from said info gathered from Mike's undercover work, and the individuals Armando picks off during Mike's recovery in the third movie. The only individual who knows and keeps tabs on Mike's involvement with the Guerreras is Howard, who knows that Mike and Isabel are in love. But once he hears word of Mike getting in too deep and the two planning on running away together, he's able to remind Mike that his duties as a cop matter more to him, helping Mike make the decision to choose the Force when he gets the Guerreras arrested and Internal Affairs confiscates the $100,000 worth of drugs. So now we have more context regarding the Guerrera bust. Mike went undercover to gather info on his lackeys that eventually led to his initial takedown. Marcus arrested said lackeys based on the info Mike gave Howard while he was undercover, and Mike turned both of the Guerreras in after being talked off a ledge by Howard when he was forced to weigh his future as a cop and his future with Isabel on the same scale. It's context that can be easily revealed and expanded upon over the course of the events happening in Bad Boys for Life, and doesn't cross over into any cemented story beats from the first movie. It also allows us to see how this newly revealed backstory regarding a very important portion of Mike and Marcus's career plays out in the plot of Bad Boys for Life when it comes to the reveal of his adjusted information. A feat which is also easily remedied with the adjustment of a few story beats, more specifically the roles of Marcus and Captain Howard. Because Marcus's involvement was limited to leading the charge in arresting Guerrera's goons as info came in, thanks to not being that high up on the need-to-know ladder when it came to taking down Guerrera, there wasn't anything he did other than being Mike's partner that warranted him being on Isabel's hit list. As I stated before, he knew Mike was undercover during the Guerrera bust. But because the info he received regarding the arrest for Guerrera's cartel members came from Howard in the form of paperwork and protocol and whatnot, he didn't have an active role in Guerrera's takedown that would have put him or his family on Isabel's radar. But that didn't mean he wouldn't have known the names and faces of the higher-ups assigned to the task force with Mike and himself while he was assigned to it. So, instead of having Marcus promise God he would go cold turkey off of violence in order to spare Mike's life after Armando guns him down, which is one of the factors that leads to his retirement in the movie, I'd propose using that time for Marcus to come to the same conclusion as a result of doing a bit of detective work. Instead, he notices that every one of said higher-ups that were involved in taking down Guerrera was getting off while Mike was recovering from Armando's attempt at his life, causing Marcus to worry that this attack wasn't a coincidence. It also makes him frustrated that Howard isn't giving him any useful information once bringing this pattern to his attention. And considering that he's now a grandfather, sees it as a sign that it's time for him to retire, and that Mike shouldn't be so quick to seek revenge due to these planned hits, and how close he is to it upon the initial reveal to the audience that the role he played in the bust involved undercover work. Howard, meanwhile, is the only one that was officially informed that Isabel escaped from prison, and being the only one from the Guerrera task force who knew about their relationship, pieced together that she has a vendetta against Mike once the other members of the task force began to drop like flies after he was shot. He purposefully kept this information from Marcus to protect him and his family once Marcus presented the pattern to him, since he wasn't directly involved in the Guerrera's takedown. Then, after seeing Marcus decide to retire, decides to do so as well and aid in Marcus's attempt to convince Mike not to go after this shooter to keep him from drawing Isabel's attention. He, of course, fails to do this because he is also on Isabel's hit list and is shot dead in front of Mike, not only strengthening his resolve, but pulling Marcus out of retirement as well, in order to ride or die with Marcus one last time.
One last time.
One last time.
You know, until Bad Boys 4. By turning Benito and Isabel Aletas into Benito and Isabel Golela and making the undercover job referenced in Bad Boys for Life, the bust that put Mike and Marcus on the map in the original Bad Boys movie, not only makes the narrative for the third movie stronger regarding all the themes it explores with Mike's development, but better connects the events of Bad Boys for Life to the franchise as a whole in a way that makes it truly feel like the events the movie promoted itself during its marketing. Even with more films planned, after the events of For Life, which, let's just be honest, was always going to be part of the equation, the Bad Boys franchise would have under its belt an action-packed, cleverly handled, and a proper movie trilogy. Lethal Weapon could never. No, believe me, I tried. Lethal Weapon 3 is a fucking enigma. Right now, the entire Bad Boys trilogy is available to stream as it stands on Hulu and Amazon Prime with the added stars package. But if you would rather own the movies, I'll have affiliate links in the description down below if you want to help financially support the channel. But with that being said, readers, your homework assignment for the day. Write in the comment section below what you overall think of the status of the Bad Boys trilogy. And if there is in fact another trilogy you want me to talk about during this segment, write it down in the comments section below as well. A proper movie trilogy is possible thanks to my supporters over on Patreon, so if you want to see more of this segment and help financially support the channel, you can join it by clicking the card at the end of the video or in the link in the description down below, where you can also find a link to my merchandise store. Or if you prefer to give a one-time donation, you can find links to my PayPal and my Ko-fi account in the description box as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. But until then, this is Readus 101. Class dismissed.